Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of the Shiny Developer Series. I am your host, Eric Nance, and without further ado, I am thrilled to welcome our special guest for this episode, our package developer, Shiny enthusiast, and all around great guy, John Coene. So let's hear my conversation with John now. Yeah. So welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of the Shiny Developer Series. I know we've been away for a few months, and a lot's happened in the world, but I am very excited to be joined by a very prominent member of the Shiny community. He's authored numerous HTML widgets and thrown some really awesome Shiny apps in the open source community. And it's my pleasure to welcome John Coene to the show. John Coene, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Yeah, so why don't you tell our audience a little bit about your background and how you discovered R and Shiny afterwards?
Sure. My background is rather dull, I'm afraid. But I originally from Belgium, did my studies in the UK. All I hold is actually a bachelor in business studies. After that, I went to China for what was supposed to be a year, but everything went terribly wrong. Fell in love with the country, and came back to Europe 5 years later, married. And so that's where I am now. I'm in Geneva. I work for the World Economic Forum in the capacity of a data analyst.
Very cool. Yeah, we actually share a lot in common. I didn't meet my wife in China, but we met in the U.S. But yes, I'm definitely trying to pick up Mandarin. I think you're probably a lot better at that than I am, I would guess.
My Mandarin is basic, but it's all right. If we need to order food later on, I can help, but not much more
Yes,
than that, I'm
I will.
afraid.
I will hold you to that later. So
Uh,
there's a lot. There's a lot I want to cover with you today. What I want to lead off with is kind of a more of a timely topic. You had released and created a very impressive Shiny application to help view COVID-19 metrics. You've actually submitted this as part of the Shiny contest, and I recall when I saw you release this, I thought, okay, this is something I definitely want to talk to John about when I have him on this episode. I would love for you to tell our audience kind of what motivated you to create this app and some of the building blocks inside it and some of the cool tricks technically or otherwise that you've learned from it. And we'd love to see
sure,
it in action.
sure, with pleasure. I'll share my screen in a bit, but essentially, like I said, I lived in China for 5 years. My wife is Chinese, so I have some sort of connection with the country. And when I saw that come up in the news, I wanted to sort of cover it. At the time, I think it was late January that I put that online. The only app that was out there, dashboard like that was out there, was that of John Hopkins,
Right.
which which was not ideal, namely for mobile. And this is why when I built the app, I used the framework shinyMobile that the David Granjon, who you had on the podcast in an earlier episode, did build as part of the R interface group. And yeah, I used that because I really wanted to have an app that I could check on my mobile, because the John Hopkins was looking dreadful on mobile. So essentially, this is what it looks like, and it's, like I said, built based on shinyMobile, and it's shinyMobile is really not mobile friendly as much as it's mobile first, and that's why it tends to look a bit oddish, admittedly, here on screen on a laptop. So we'll just pretend with this neat option here. We'll pretend it's a phone, and that gives you the UI that you'd have on a Pixel 2 phone here, for instance. And the idea there too was to pull the numbers from various sources. As you probably well know, there's a lot of controversy over those numbers, what they mean, what they really are. We don't know. But at the time, I think, if I remember correctly, the discrepancy was even greater between what John Hopkins had and what other sources in China did report. I think that changed over the time, but essentially the idea was that then I could take data from those different sources, And with my little bit of Mandarin, I could work out how to get the data from websites like Jingxiangying and Jingxiangyuan and these sort of things, and WeChat with situation there. And essentially the app is structured like it's built on shinyMobile using Golem, of course. It's just
Yes.
so great to structure.
I am a huge fan of it. I have
Mm,
gone Golem all the way since
yeah,
they released it in the wild. Yep.
yeah, indeed, me too. I can't do without anymore. Even though I did actually build a few apps using in the form of a package. Shiny Golem does a much better job than I ever did in structuring things, and
Likewise. Yep.
it sort of forced me to use modules and these sort of things, which I never used properly before. So there's quite a bit of this here. I'll try and have a bit in the code later on, of course. So you have a home tab and then 4 other tabs, one for John Hopkins, one for each data source. And then
Okay.
another one that I added later on, which is just news, which you can set up with Google News via Google News API. And so this is the first tab from using John Hopkins data. Essentially, I use for all the graphics, I use eCharts4R, one of the libraries that I built, for 2 reasons. Namely, well, since I authored it, I know it inside out. And second, I try and sort of, I have to eat my own cooking. I can't just put an app out, a package out there and hope others use it if I don't use it myself. And it's got a couple of neat features that hopefully we can get into. So these are essentially on this first tab from John Hopkins, there's basic stats that nothing too fancy, but there's some nice features here. For example, from eCharts4R that I quite like, the timeline feature. So you can have a play button, have the data, we can see the data, how it progressed over time. It's not restricted to a timeline, to some time series or whatever. And these are neat cards by shinyMobile again. It looks odd like this, admittedly, but on mobile, you can click on it and then it expands like this. And you can normally click and drag on the mobile or close it like this. Then another interesting tab perhaps is this one. It made me build 1 or 2 sort of those packages that I love, they're tiny, they do one thing, but I find they do it rather well. So for example, here you have the map of China, and that was the data from Jingxiangyuan. That's why I wanted it, is because they give breakdown, not at the level of the province, but even more granular. And so here, when you select a country, it scrolls down automatically to just below where you have the breakdown. And
that's very nice.
That's one of those tiny things that it's honestly just it's not much code. It was just not there, and I thought of building it essentially based on that. And then again, the maps here, it's all eCharts4R again. And then you have a final tab, news. It does a basic news search, I think, based on simple keywords, and uses one of these neat layouts by shinyMobile.
Yeah, this is visually very impressive. And the fact that you're able to take shinyMobile, which was pretty new at that time. I remember David had been working on it a bit, but it was released not too long ago. This was, in my opinion, the first real showcase of a lot of its potential. And I have a very less elegant version of an app I've done for like a side podcast venture, but this blows it completely out of the water. How difficult was it to learn shinyMobile as you were creating this?
It was surprisingly easy. David does a great job at abstracting all of this stuff into something that the functions are named differently, but you've sort of seen them already. You've seen dashboard body, you've seen dashboard page, you've seen this sort of thing, this tab panel. All of that sort of already exists in various forms in Shiny, and he really did it well. Because I want to insist on the fact that at least for shinyMobile, he wrote, as far as I know, at least 99% of the code behind. I didn't contribute directly. I just wanted to use it there.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is what I've always been hoping for in the Shiny community when we have these great packages out there, that we're able to showcase a lot of their uses that are not just the cookie cutter demos, right? I mean, this is the way people can really learn. And the fact that you submitted as part of the Shiny contest, now it's easy for people to try it out on their own and look at the code side by side with the app and try things out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, certainly I commend you for not only making this itself, but then releasing it in the open. It's very impressive.
Thank you. Thank you. For the code, I could delve into the code itself, but it's a bit, I don't know how to cover it exactly. Essentially, the way I built it was, the aim was to not just have it open source, as in I have the code out there, but hopefully that other people could easily run it and redeploy the app if they wanted to, making modifications if they wanted to. So I built this this website explaining everything. It's itself an R package, so you can just install it like so. And then I thought on top of it, since I had the data and I had that small, which the package includes everything obviously that you need to sort of set up the app. So you need to collect the data and then run the app afterwards. And essentially, I thought, why not add an API, which I'm afraid I had to sort of, which is part of the package. You can redeploy yourself. I had to take it down because my bill was going up as people were pinging it like crazy. So you can redeploy that if you fancy it. And actually, somewhat interesting, yeah, it's funny because I had the tracking code for Google Analytics in there. And actually, it was really nice to see that some people, or quite a lot of people, actually deployed it themselves. And yeah, it was pretty cool. So and then in this documentation, you have everything you need to deploy it. But essentially, one thing I tried to do is to merge the fact that it's sort of shiny prod to me. It's out there. You can build
Right.
there's a database, Postgres database in the back, which you can set up. But if you don't want to, here you can just run it without. If at least you just want to try, you just install the package, crawl the data, and then run the app, and you're good to go.
Yeah. That's an excellent point that you've covered two sides of this. You can run this in kind of a development or testing framework, but you've laid this foundation to deploy it in a production-like workflow as well. I think that's another example where a lot of the shiny examples we'll see are kind of great for prototyping things, but then can you really use it in production? This is certainly one of those cases where you've done a lot of the groundwork that this could be very much a production app if you chose it to.
Yeah, it's a bit funny to me that this whole R in prod is still somewhat of a debate some places. I have tons of shiny apps in production all over the place, at work and elsewhere, that run great. I'm not going to show you the numbers I got for this app, but I was very surprised myself, honestly, that in all honesty, I didn't use shiny test, profile, load test. I didn't do any of that. I just built the app that I like, deployed it, shared it on Twitter and elsewhere. People liked it and got quite a bit of traffic. And honestly, it worked fine. It served sometimes 13, 15 concurrent users without any issue. I didn't have to use promises or any of that. And I know that if you do, it works even better. So I'm all for shiny in prod. That's what we use mainly at work and that I use a lot in my side projects as well.
Yeah, well, that's excellent news. And I, like you were saying, we saw this reputation many years. I would say within probably the last year or two, we're starting to see that debunked a bit with more data science teams saying that, hey, R isn't just for us prototyping, machine learning models or these simple interfaces. We can go the full other spectrum and get to that production deployment. So like you said, every web type app I make at work is a shiny app. And some of them are very simple things, and some of them are very much a production app that are used with key stakeholders. And if anything goes wrong, bad things will happen, but we make sure that we cover all of our bases and prevent those. So certainly what I'm hoping in conversations like what we're having and future episodes is that there should not be this myth about shiny and R in general not being used in production. They're very much first-class citizens of it. You just need best practices to make that work well for your organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the thing that I feel, and it's not to sing the praises of shiny too much, but it suffers from its own success, is the fact that it is indeed it is indeed, as far as I know, the best framework you can do for any kind of prototyping. I don't know if you've used other things elsewhere, but I'm never doing a Django form ever again. Even just getting an input data is nightmarish.
Yeah.
But then there's this sort of false dichotomy. If it's good for prototyping, surely it can't be good in prod, and it's not the case, obviously.
Right.
Yeah, which I think in the more this, I think at least I might be wrong because I'll admit I'm very ignorant of the whole thing, but it's not the prod thing and the scale problem will occur whatever framework you use, whatever language you use, and it's generally more in terms of DevOps on how you use auto scaling and these sort of things.
Right.
Which incidentally, when I built this app, it got quite popular and people wanted one at work as well, which I did also build in Shiny, which saw peaks in traffic that were far greater. But they're using I just used Docker and help from IT, and it was perfectly fine.
Yeah, there's lots of these other tools out there for, like you mentioned, like container technologies and deployment to other hosting platforms. You can achieve a lot of robust, production deployments with just a little investment in these DevOps principles. And that's something that I've been learning personally lately with a lot of Amazon Web Service, deployment stuff and everything like that. But it all kind of blends together, and keeping an open mind can open up these doors or these pathways to making your apps be able to scale up as needed. So certainly it may seem a little daunting at first, but with a little investment, such as I've seen others in the Shiny community start to kind of broadcast a bit more, you can really make a lot of headway in these deployments. So it's cool to see that you're exploring those as well.
And on that, if I might sort of make another comment and maybe segue into something else.
Yes.
I feel, and it's a journey I've sort of been on mentally, so to speak. We become too critical of the apps that we build. I do the same myself. I've seen other people who build amazing apps, but they present it to me like it was rubbish. Sorry, it's all I could build, and it actually works fine. And that sort of segues into why I sort of built the waiter package.
Yes.
It's simply that I had an app that was actually it was not taking a long time to load, but it felt like an eternity. And as I built the package, you feel like it's slow, but in actual fact, if I might show you something. So let's go to here, Google Analytics. I mean, it's not fast to load, is it? Yet it's an application by Google that's a dashboard that
Right.
on screen right now doesn't even have that much data. But you saw how long it took to get there.
Yeah. Right.
If your Shiny app takes this long, you probably go crazy. You're thinking, I should optimize the code. Of course, they're completely different games, but still, if these apps, people are used to these sort of apps taking that long to load, and we shouldn't sort of freak out too much about it. However, there's this sort of one thing that sort of it's without getting too deep or pompous about it. There's often there's this great book by Rory Sutherland, the marketer, called Alchemy, in which he observes that of the London Underground, that the single thing that increased passenger satisfaction on the London Tube the most is not faster, more frequent trains, but the simple little dot display matrix that you have on the platform. Because then people know how long they have to wait. You can wait 9 minutes knowing your train is coming in 9 minutes, whereas you can't wait 4 minutes on the platform without knowing when the train is coming. You're standing there, you don't know if the train's coming, if you missed it, if it's delayed. And it's the same for sort of a Shiny app. When I pulled Google Analytics there, the app didn't present, the page was in blank for 6 seconds or however long it took to load. There was some sort of visual cues that told me that it was working,
Right.
that it was in effect loading. And in that, I'll just take to try and demonstrate that. I have, this is a slide I had for Saturday here in Neuchâtel. I'll just refresh to try and make it work. What you have there is two Shiny apps. The one on the left is a use waiter or loading screen, but takes 1.5 seconds to load. The other one takes twice as long, but has waiter. And I always argue that even though it takes twice as long, it doesn't feel as long because I'm presented with something. I know that it's working. I know that something's coming. Whereas on the other one, I'm in front of a blank screen. I don't know what's happening.
Right.
Yeah. And I'll just stop that because it's gonna drive us crazy. But yeah, that was one of the ideas behind that. I had an app that was not really taking long, but there was some sort of transition that felt unnatural between someone clicking a button or something in an app bar and getting transferred to another page, but that was happening sort of too oddly.
Yeah, and I must say Waiter has been a huge help for some of my recent apps where it's a hybrid of it's starting up, like you said in the Google Analytics example. There is some data loading happening, and there's some like connections APIs happening in a startup. And the worst thing that users can see is a page where they type in the address bar and there's absolutely nothing happening. And they're going to blame you sometimes. They're like, hey, wait a minute, Eric, that app's not working. I'm like, wait, just give it another 10 seconds. And so I have an app about to be in production where I just have a little logo of our group and a little spinner next to the waiter. And that way they know that, hey, that awesome dashboard is loading, just be patient. But I cannot tell you how much feedback I've gotten from my more earlier apps where even if it's a simple plot that just has a lot of data points and, things like ggplot2 are taking a bit of time to refresh. And then they're thinking they're just waiting at that blank white area. And I'm like, oh no, I got to figure out a way to tell them something's happening. So I would try like pop-ups and stuff, but obviously Waiter is just another one of these great examples of little tools that if you know about them, can make this experience for your users and frankly you as a developer a lot more sane and a lot more controllable, and be able to share these concepts of, hey, things are happening, just stand by a little bit, but that perception is real. That 3-second plot, I wasn't concerned about it, but if I see a blank white screen, yeah, I'm going to start to worry a little bit if that's going to take a bit of time. So certainly thank you for making that package. It's certainly excellent.
Not at all, my pleasure, really. And and yeah, I think what you said is true, and sort of it touches upon two things. The things that that perception of time more than how long it takes, but also this. And there I have to take a wee bash at Shiny. It's essentially what you said. When you have a plot and the data underlying it is being recalculated, Shiny adds this by default sort of opaque layer. It adds a recalculating class, which is, you know what I mean, whitish thing. And that's a great example of where our behavior as developer has changed to fit the platform rather than the other way around, because that you know something is coming because you know Shiny, but to anyone else, to the layman, that actually communicates probably the opposite, that something has gone terribly wrong. Why is this plot gone opaque? But that thankfully was added thanks to Hadley. Essentially, at first on Waiter you can only have full screen, and then he opened a few issues saying essentially I think you should and could be able to overlay it over different elements of the app, which I can bring the website for essentially.
Yeah, this website's excellent, by the way. I mean, did you have a lot of web development training before you got into Shiny? Because it sure looks like you did.
No, not really. I love package down, but I've done so much. I've done so much package down. I have 25 sites with package down, so I wanted to explore different things. And this one, oh my god, I can't even remember what it is. But there's other sort of documentation website generators that you can find. That are very easy to deploy. The thing is, they won't work on our Markdown, or at least not natively. You could build something too, but they'll work on Markdown. And essentially, everything there is built on Markdown.
Cool.
Trying to remember the name. So yeah, this one I can't remember what it is, but I've used a few. We'll explore them eventually. We'll see.
Absolutely.
That I used for that. And essentially, I still use package down because it's great for the references, for the reference. It's amazing for that, and for the vignettes essentially. But here, since it's all shiny, I didn't really need the vignettes because there was no real output to be produced there. So I used that.
Sure.
And essentially, it's grown into something. It started with just the plain loading screen, but then I added a lot. And essentially, I named it waiter because in my mind it was still more of a waiting screen. Going back to that analogy of waiting for something than a loading screen. I thought a waiter would be good, and I had the hex sticker in mind and everything. And then I added other things, and admittedly makes it a bit confusing because now you have waiter, waitress, hostess, butler, and everything. But essentially, all the documentation is here. The best way to demo it is probably to click demo and go to the demo Shiny app.
Yeah, this is something I really appreciate. So sometimes I just need to see this stuff in action, and having a little demo that I can play with is really helpful. So
yeah, it's just as I think actually I steal all of that idea from DreamRs, and they've got shiny widgets. You have also incidentally they have this shiny widget gallery, just amazing. And I thought I wanted something similar here.
Yeah.
So essentially, you have waiter, which is so you can, as you see, you can layer it on top of pretty much anything. It doesn't have to be a plot or a table. It can be an arbitrary piece of HTML that you have. And you can layer it on everything, or you can layer it on the whole page. We can do on full screen, and I have something on the full screen.
Yep.
And then I brought in other things. I brought like the hostess, which is essentially a progress bar, which can work on its own, but generally works better with the waiter. So with that layer, either full screen or not. So you can have something like this. Here it's on an SVG. It's pretty cool.
That's really slick. I'll have to play with that more.
And then, or on the elements like that. These are off the shelf sort of progress bars that they provide. And then here, just one thing real quick, because again, it's shiny. What I like to do that more and more, I don't know, I'm not even sure it's good UI, to be honest, but I take the navbar page and I hide the navbar, and then with update tab set panel and everything, you can essentially have those, create your own navigation, so to speak. So here, this is a navbar page, and that leads to one tab panel, that one leads to another, and that button just returns you to the home tab. If that makes sense.
Neat. Yeah, I was wondering how you pulled this off, because I've been wondering if I could do a similar thing with some of the dashboard packages as well. I have the sidebar, but
I can just briefly show you something that's somewhat relevant. That's the first app I actually submitted to the first Shiny contest. I have a small blog post here where I sort of explain that. So there's the code here. You have the navbar page, and what you do is you just, with this CSS, you hide the navbar, and then you can have a button that use update tab set panel. So if I copy that, I can go to our studio here and just run that. And this is a navbar page, as you see, but there's no navbar. And I have created a button that switches me to hello, which is another tab here. And yeah, I essentially, which is essentially, incidentally, the app I created waiter for. I had a transition that was a bit odd. But here we have all the spinners that you have out of the box, which I got from various places. I did a very poor job of tracking where I got them from. They're all from Code Pens and other things, SpinKit, CSS, etc. But interestingly, it's got the waitress and the hostess, which I'm happy to demonstrate. But in all honesty, I myself only use waiter and a spinner. The waitress is with, essentially, you have to know, you have to, it's a loading bar, but you have to increment it yourself, a bit like the package progress. So you have to, if it happens in steps, so in a for loop, which I rarely do, that could be useful. But then it can be pretty interesting, because then again, you can layer it on top of elements, there's different themes again, or even this, like you can layer it on this very button, which is pretty cool. The notifications are not that great, but they should appear right here. And yeah, I've got that, and then hostess is the very fancy loading bars, essentially, which it's there just for fun. But I'll admit I've never really used it, and this is the one you can use for the logo or an SVG or something like that.
Would this also benefit from knowing the steps ahead of time, like you said, in the for loop, or could you kind of do this indefinitely and it just kind of magically transitions when it ends? You know?
I've tried to, well, I have some sort of infinite mode in there, but it's not that great because the
Okay.
increases in percentage rather than pixels it would be. But it's there, but it's not that great.
Yeah, well, I can tell you one technique that I did for an app that's, like I said, about to be in production is we have to send like a computation job to another server in the cloud. And I don't really know when it's like a progress of like how long it's going to take. I just get like a poll of it every 3 seconds saying if it's quote running or finishing.
Mm.
And so I just took the easy way out. I did a little modal on top of a little animated GIF, and then it just closes when it's done. And actually gave people a lot of laughs. So I was like, okay, that's one way to make the app more entertaining when something's happening and I don't have wind of like how long it's going to take. It's just
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
So this
What
is
you,
obviously
what you
something I
need is
can use
user
in that
feedback
same
in any
framework.
form, right? It doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, so I've learned these tricks along the way. Sometimes you just don't think of trying it until you experience like what it is from like the user side of things. Because as a developer, you're a little more lenient sometimes on showing the status of things. But when you step away for a second, then you
Mhm.
realize, no, just letting the app do nothing and not showing anything's happening is probably not the best idea either. So certainly Waiter is going to be a huge asset to my toolbox in my apps in the future as well. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. It's probably, I don't know, maybe I don't know why, but I maybe I approach things differently. But I like to I've I've to me the it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine that when you design an app, design it to impress the user. Don't design it to impress another shiny developer. That doesn't matter. And so to me, it's really aesthetics first, and yeah, aesthetics first. It's a what you're preparing is a visual output, and again,
Right.
to me, it's one of these false dichotomies where it's no, I take care of the back end, the server. I don't see why you can't do both essentially. Maybe you have time constraints, I'll admit, but in the end, sort of the analogy that I use is that of plots. It took a long time to educate us, our users, and many other laymen, but
Mm-hmm.
to understand that a chart with better aesthetics is not just a prettier chart; it's a chart that does a better job at communicating insights.
Exactly.
Um, and that's true of your Shiny app as well, I think. And so you have to think of the user experience and the UI that you want to provide to me first. It doesn't mean you sacrifice everything else. Normally, when you create your Shiny app, that surely the model is already built, or whatever it is that the insights that you want to present is already built.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about what you show the user, essentially. Um, so I try to tackle these sort of things first, which maybe that's why I'm creating those packages, which if you can look under the hood, Eric, it's nothing fancy. It's really nothing fancy. It's just that I think at least no one had really thought of these sort of things, um, which is something, for example, that I've tried to do more recently with the sever package, which I just pushed on CRAN.
Oh,
Um,
yes. We
which is
love to hear about that. Yeah, absolutely. Because you have quite a few of these widgets out there and these new packages that are all attacking this different space of like the user experience or other factors. So yeah, let's see what server's about.
this is so there's a bit the Grim logo. I don't know if that was a good idea. Sets the tone, doesn't it?
Apparently so, yeah.
Yeah. But essentially, it's this. It was simple. It was that I built for the Shiny app that I built for work, where the coffee tracker that I built for work. That one, because it was external facing, had to go through a lot of checks and committees and everything to check the app was right.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that came up is what is this disconnected screen that I'm getting after some point? And essentially, I thought you shouldn't have a disconnected screen essentially, or the disconnected screen shouldn't look the way it does. I don't know if you remember the default of how it looks, and you have that
Oh,
little button.
all too well, unfortunately, because sometimes it'll happen at the most inopportune times.
Exactly. I can try and show it here. Hopefully,
Sure.
if I have I think so. This is the default. This is an app, and if I disconnect the server, can I do that? Yeah. Stop. Now I get this instead.
Oh,
And when you
that's
click
way
that,
better looking than the
yeah.
default.
And you can, and essentially you can put whatever you want here, whatever button, you can customize the color and everything again. And that was one thing that, because that was one of the things, honestly, that kind of made me panic a bit inside when people told me, we have to get rid of this disconnected screen. And I thought, oh my God, I can't. And so I thought maybe if I make it look a bit better, that'll be all right. And it did go through. People thought, oh, well, it's all right. And I named it sever because I thought I was thinking of severing a connection. But then while I was at it, I thought I'd add another function that's called cleave. And essentially it's, again, sorry, I have to zoom in a bit on that one, which is a cleave function, which is used for when you have these error messages. No one likes them, but what you want me to say, they happen. Things go wrong and your app will have some. But if I am still very annoyed by object of type closure is not subsettable, never mind my colleagues who don't even know how to write a line of code. So I thought, surely we can just make that a bit better, and you can just show something, you know, whatever message you want. You can create a theme and have it show, or even have this if you want.
Oh, that's hilarious.
But essentially, well, these are the fancy stuff for people to be creative. But generally, I would use something that looks oddly similar to Waiter, but it's just a screen. I said, sorry, there's a problem. Contact Eric, something like that you could put. But yeah, that was another thought of putting something to production and thinking if people see that, yeah, I don't know, you know how it is. People, that's the one thing they're going to remember about your app. Is that one red error message, even though they might have used it 9 times out of 10, it was perfectly fine. That one time they will remember.
They'll remember it, and even if it goes away, like after a few seconds, they'll be like, that error message shouldn't be there. So anything I can do to mask it, or at least give something a little different to see first. And the other potential I see in this is that depending on why your app crashes, you could show a different message depending on what type of error it is. And maybe it's an API connection error. Maybe it's something else going on. And then you can kind of be like, well, it's not the app's fault, it's the API's fault. Contact the IT team or something like that. So I see lots of interesting potential here.
That's true. I just put it to CRAN, but I had other ideas of maybe a way for the user to copy the error, the real error message, and be able to send it to you so that you can debug. But yeah, this is another one of those where I thought, again, to me was the aesthetics that sort of central.
Yeah. So like I said, this is another great example of how you're trying to cover that user experience level, and it helps both sides, not just the user, but the developer at the same time. And you said a great point earlier, is that Shiny is a highly visual medium. How can it not be, right? Yeah. And one of the building blocks of those is obviously the visuals that you can put inside your app. And you mentioned it a few minutes ago, you've done some excellent work on the visualization side with the eCharts package. We'd love to hear more about kind of the backstory of eCharts for R, and what was your motivation for creating that, and how you've been using that in your kind of production apps.
Sure. Well, my fascination for that was the htmlwidgets package on top of which it is built. And I think the first such I think there was no htmlwidgets package back then, but I was absolutely blown away. I think it was R charts, the old R charts that.
Oh yes, that like blew a lot of us away. Of like, okay, this is all possible from the R side. Oh my gosh, we gotta learn this.
That was amazing. That was absolutely amazing. And then I think Ramnat, I'm definitely pronouncing his name wrong, but I think he wrapped it. Instead of wrapping all the libraries into an R package, he built a utility to build such packages, all the HTML widgets.
Yep.
And from that, I think is Carson from our studio who did Plotly.
Yes. Which
is still the gold standard, essentially, in terms of HTML widgets. Absolutely amazing one, which I used quite a bit. And then at some point, I just really wanted to understand and build one, try and build one. And I had no knowledge of JavaScript at the time. And still today, actually, my knowledge of JavaScript is quite limited. But
That's
if I
amazing you say that, because when I look at e-charts and I'm like, he's got to have to have classes in this before. There's absolutely no way. But wow, so you're saying it kind of was a learning journey for you, and then you kind of built a package on top of it.
yeah, and yeah, it's you have to look at the sort of, because why you're probably coming from not knowing HTML, which is the package itself. And so what you're picturing is something probably like I did then, extremely daunting. Is I'm going to need dependencies. I'm going to need a lot of JavaScript. I need to manage this across Shiny or Markdown,
Mm-hmm.
presentations. And the truth is, doing that should be extremely complicated. But the HTML widgets package takes care of most of it. And I'd just like to, if I may show you a quick example. Sorry, I have some
Absolutely.
window here in the way. What am I doing? Let's create package. Yes, and we're gonna create a package called this test. Yeah, sorry, Studio. I'll do it. We create something. And you'll see what I mean on how much it handles. And I have to zoom in. That looks better. Which is still like I told you. I did this HTML workshop with Iram just a week ago, last Saturday.
Yeah, I was trying to get in. Now your workshop filled up too quick.
Yeah, I'm afraid that I wanted to limit a bit the number of people because it was open to a lot, and I wanted to. It's probably just this third time I do this workshop.
I see.
And though with some arrogance, I'll say I know HTML widgets. I'm not sure, honestly, about the educational side and training. I thoroughly enjoy it. I'm not sure how good a job I do at it. So I wanted a small room to be able to debug and things like that.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And so one of the things that I show there is that, to me, still today, even though I've done it hundreds of times, blows me away, is this. If you, from the package HTML widgets, there is this function called scaffold widget, which builds the basic structure of a HTML widget. And let's say we're going to build a widget called Eric. And essentially it creates all these files. This is not the purpose of this here. But what I want to show you is how much HTML widget does for you. So I created a new package. I'm going to document it. I'm going to load all the functions. And essentially this scaffold widget created a simple function, the same name as the widget, called Eric. And it's going to be Eric says hello. And you see that technically you have an HTML widget that opens in the viewer.
Yeah.
This is HTML. So from there, in actual fact, there's not too much work for the developers to do. So I'm still blown away by this, and I want to, I every time try and show this because this is really, I mean, I think HTML widget itself deserves the credit for most of what I do there. So it handles a lot, and essentially to build an HTML widget, my claim at least is that you need to know JSON more than JavaScript. There's
interesting.
There's very little JavaScript involved. If you look at eCharts, HighCharter, Plotly, Chart.js, it's one JavaScript function that initializes the whole chart, and the chart is defined by JSON. So you just need to build the JSON, and then you're good. But I'm rambling. So this is the eCharts 4R, which I built it. I started 2 years ago, I think. And I started first with the eCharts, which was for another version of eCharts that released the 4. And by then I had learned so much more, I thought I'd redo an entire package on that. And it's got a few interesting features, but the one I sort of want to focus on is what I've tried at least to implement recently, which is related to Shiny. There's a lot of documentation on Shiny. There's a lot of documentation on HTML widgets, but there's very little on how you make the two work together.
Yes.
Although you obviously can. So there's essentially two ways when you have Shiny. You can send data from the R server to JavaScript, the front end, or get it back. Generally, the other way, getting it back, a lot of people do that. I'm sure you've done some DT,
Oh, yes.
tables package, and when you click a row, you can pick that up server side. I don't know if you've ever
Exactly.
done that, but that's an amazing one. So that's communicating data from JavaScript to Shiny, to the R server. But you can do the other way around, obviously. But the interesting thing that I was trying to build here, let me take this for instance, and I'll run it not in this studio, but this one. And we run that. Essentially is when you build the charts, when you think of building a ggplot2 chart in Shiny, if you want to just add one series, one geom to that, you have to re-render the whole chart.
Yes.
And one cool thing with JavaScript is that you don't necessarily have to. The axis, you can see on the screen that the axes are there. Some things is already there. The Y data is already there. I don't want to have to touch that. I just want to add a series. And here I can add a series, and you can see that there's no blank, there's no flash. It really just adds that series. And it's one, a lot more performant. And second, it provides these neat animations because this JavaScript library out of the box sort of support that stuff. And so now I can click remove, it's removed there. I can click add, it adds it back in. And that's sort of the thing I've tried to develop lately with eCharts for a lot, to try and make it work with Shiny a lot more.
That's such an important tip. And this is something that, I've been using Shiny since the beginning, but I admit I probably have abused the whole use the server to redraw or interact with things a bit too much. But honestly, from reading, for example, Colin Fay's about to be published book about engineering production grade Shiny apps, there's a nice section on doing more on the client side to avoid these are doing too much syndrome. And what you're showing here is another great use case of that, is that if you can have the know-of-all to do more client side, you don't have to redraw that whole plot, especially if it had like, say, 1,000 points inside. If you're just redrawing one little thing, an axis label or whatever have you, don't overload your app more than it already is doing. It's already doing a lot. Make the thing a little easier life. So this is a very nice technique. I really like it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the main idea. And in terms of what I've developed with eCharts for R, most of it, like I said, really credit goes to htmlwidget. The rest is to eCharts, the native library. It's really powerful. It's got this this timeline thing, like I showed you, which is a bit, I don't know, it's a bit odd, but you can use it well. But if you can use it well, it can be extremely powerful. So this is all random data, that's why it looks a bit odd. But just in one argument, by setting timeline to true, you go from this to that, where you have an interactive timeline. These are one of the neat things. And then also, as you might be able to guess from the nav bar here, it covers quite a lot. This geospatial data.
Yes.
And other things.
Yeah. So this, again, it's amazing that this was, like I mentioned, like you had mentioned, kind of a way to learn how these widgets play out and how to construct them effectively. And now you've got something that's not just a prototype package. This is something you can use in any Shiny app, or frankly, you don't even have to use it in a Shiny. You could use this in any kind of like web-based output, like from our Markdown or elsewhere. So it seems like you got a lot of possibilities here to play with.
Indeed. Yeah, it's true. It's true. And people forget that you can just save them as standalone HTML and put them elsewhere if you want to.
Yeah, that's a technique that I'm starting to explore a bit more, because sometimes for whatever reason you don't have the luxury of deploying something on a Shiny server out in the cloud or somewhere, and you just need to share something as simple as a single file that you just load in Chrome or whatever the browser of choice is, and have everything baked in, the data behind it and the JSON and all that, so you don't have to worry about surprises if they don't have like an IT department deploy something like that. So certainly I do have a bias towards Shiny for these things, but at the same time, these are great ways to use it in other places too.
Yeah, indeed. I've tried to explore sort of some of that, because like picture the previous app that I showed, where you click a button, you add a series. We use the R server, but technically there's no need. You could have everything in an HTML file. I haven't managed to make it work for a lot of things, but for some things, For some things you can. So I've added, for example, I've managed to have buttons. So this button is completely separate from the chart, yet is able to interact with it. Where there I've set it to zoom on some random area as a demo. When I click zoom, it zooms there. Or here I can even have, as you can see, it's completely disconnected from the chart, and I can highlight node number 4.
Oh, slick.
This little bit, and this is packaged down. Our markdown is standalone. Over here you can zoom in, highlight an area. It's pretty cool. But it doesn't work with a lot of things right now on eChoice4R. It's more for kicks than being useful just yet, but I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, like you said, yeah, this is opening the doors for a lot of possibilities here. So as you were talking about HTML widgets and showing that quick example of how you can get started quickly, you had that great nugget, like you said, about having expertise in JSON is just as important, if not more important, than the JavaScript itself. What other advice do you have for those in our audience that want to start making HTML widgets that maybe come from just Shiny experience like me, because I never did JavaScript before any of this. My only web development learning back in grad school was building PHP websites with MySQL databases. I wasn't exactly a UI wizard, but so what advice do you have for those that want to get more effective at building HTML widgets in this situation?
That's a very good question. I'm going to plug my own stuff. I'm trying to write a book. Hopefully I can get it published that covers that in great depth. But it's difficult to say because essentially I learned everything just trial and error. Like I've said, there's a bit of documentation. What I've shown you is you can, from very little, get the basic structure of it down. And essentially, I think the issue there, if I might, is too often in the R world, I feel like we compare ourselves to the top-notch developers. Whenever you and I write a package, you compare it to dplyr or the tidyverse, and you think maybe what I'm writing is not so good. Well, it's wrong. There's a lot of those packages that are amazing, and I think it's just about that. When you build your first HTML widget, you're not going to rebuild Plotly overnight. But there's a lot of others, very small libraries that would greatly benefit the community, that are not integrated with R, and I don't know, specialize on a certain one type of chart that makes it a lot easier to integrate. And I would say start with this sort of things, trial and error.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of us have been learning. And earlier in the year, I had the pleasure of being in a short course at our studio conference for JavaScript for Shiny users. And Garrick Bowie led that course, and Colin Fay was one of the TAs. And lots of interesting information. I admit it was a lot to process in 2 days, but there are a lot of sentiments that you're saying too, is making sure you try a simple widget first, and then knowing the tools that you have available for debugging when things go crazy, whether it's in the developer console or just in the R session itself. It just takes practice. There isn't a great way that you can magically give somebody like that prospective way of getting it right the first time. It's just going to be, you're giving them nuggets of wisdom along the way, but they're just going to have to try themselves, I think, to get
it's that, and it's motivation. It's really just that, because it's like I showed you, I think it was not really, I don't know, no one should say that, but it's not that complicated. But what I mean is, well, another example you could take is CSS.
Sure.
Most of people who program in R a lot of them are academics who trained in stats and understand concepts that are far more complicated than CSS. It's just because it's daunting and because it's another world and because, you know, but this sort of thing, CSS, if you set yourself to do it just 2 hours, and I think most R users would be good to go. JavaScript and HTML widget would take a bit longer, but I'm sure most people could eventually get there. And it's often just about, you'd be surprised how little JavaScript or how little CSS can make a huge difference on your application.
That's something I've seen in a lot of these, and more recently, a lot of the Shiny contest submissions is, you'll notice they definitely don't look like a normal Shiny app, or there are little tricks here and there. And there's certainly a blend of using, say, a lot of the packages you created and say from David and others in the community, but it's also just those little polishes of CSS or other maybe JavaScript simple functions. And when I see it from the outsider perspective, I think they must have done some real wizardry magic in there. And certainly a lot of it is, but there are other ones that if you just know a little bit of CSS, you can change it almost instantly. So it's certainly something that is on my to-do list to get better at, is like kind of styling the app a bit better, and not just sticking with defaults all the time, although now the defaults are getting a lot better in a lot of the UI packages, but having just at least some intermediate knowledge of how to make things a little different, like say the text in a slider input, making that a little bigger to read. Like that was my first CSS customization in Shine, just making that font size bigger. And I thought I like had this revelation in my mind when I figured that out. But that's simple, right? I mean, it goes way beyond that, but those skills I think would be very helpful.
Yes and no. I mean, yes, indeed, it is simple, but you do that for 4 inputs and you have an app that looks completely different than any other Shiny app.
True.
Another good trick that I sort of give people, to me, that changes everything, is the font. Get yourself a font. Google font, anything, or the one of your organization. Google Fonts easier. You'd be amazed how different everything suddenly look. And it is just these little things that really make, like you said, I think, a huge difference.
Yeah, that's on my next task, is not just the little CSS tricks, but just changing the font so that they know that when Eric makes a Shiny app at work, it's going to look a little different than the ones everyone else makes. And sometimes little things make a difference to a lot of our executives, as silly as that might sound. These little touches can take it to another level. So so we cover a lot of ground. I kind of want to leave this provocative question to you towards the end, is that you've walked us through a lot of great examples of enhancing, like we talk about the user experience of an app, tricks that you can do to minimize or make the illusion of things loading faster, little things like that. But what general advice do you have for developers who are, say, they've done basic Shiny apps and they want to take the next step into building complex applications? Like, as you've been doing that more in your work, it sounds like, what things can you tell our audience do you think might help that transition to go from just prototyping to, hey, this is something I can put in production?
Good question. They asked me in a bit of a pincer. Well, up until recently, I would have to tell you the same as for the HTML widgets, trial and error. That's, however, very unsatisfying. There is now, thankfully, I can bring it up here. There is Mastering Shiny that's going to come out by Hadley Wickham himself. You've got the book by David that you mentioned right here. That one's pretty amazing. And you've got the one by Colin that you talked about. These, I think, are really good. Because I work a bit on side projects with David, and I really like his book. I have to plug it. I think it's one of those really neat ones, because it's, like I said, I don't have any formal background or education in computer science or these sort of things. So learning a new language is quite difficult. It is difficult. So and it is very frustrating. If you pick up JavaScript tomorrow and you have to relearn how to do a basic thing like reading a CSV in, it's extremely frustrating. But there you learn to include a bit of JavaScript to greatly enhance your Shiny app by writing very little, essentially, JavaScript. You don't feel like you start from scratch. And before you know it, you write a lot more, and you have a much greater app.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. It's been so awesome chatting with you. Like I said, I've been wanting to do this for a long time now, and we finally got you on the Dev Series. For those that are interested in seeing what you're up to in the art community and the Shiny community, what are the best places or ways that the listeners can get a hold of you?
The best place is my ridiculous Twitter. My if I can't even type my handle here, JDataP, and that's where you'll find me. My DMs are open. Please feel free to contact me. Honestly, and I mean it. whatever, as long as it's R related, I'm more than happy to at least try and help.
Excellent. We'll have all those links and all the other packages and references you mentioned in the show notes for this episode. So, John, again, thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Shiny Dev Series. And you are welcome back anytime as you're building new cool stuff. And you have an open invitation to come back.
Thank you very much, Eric, and I must thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So we'll have some closing thoughts after this, but thanks again, John, and we'll be right back.
Cheers. Thank you.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that great conversation with John. We covered a lot of ground, and he is a thrill to talk to, and I hope he comes back for future episodes. First, a bit of housekeeping before we sign off here. If you'd like to see the detailed show notes for this episode, you can head to our website at shinydevseries.com. You can see all the past episodes there as well, with lots of excellent content if you're an enthusiast for Shiny. We'll be back in a few weeks with our next episode, and in fact, throughout the year, we have a lot of great guests lined up covering the full spectrum of Shiny development from both a developer perspective as well as a practitioner or a consulting perspective. I hope you really enjoy the guests that we have lined up for you. Plus, I plan on sharing some of the tips I've learned along the way in using Shiny throughout the years, especially as I've built a handful of great production Shiny apps at the day job, and I want to share some tips I learned along the way there. So again, if you want to keep up to date with the latest episodes, feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel and head to our website, shinydevseries.com. And also, we have a new Twitter account to show the new episode notices. You can follow that at @shinydevseries. So until next time, we'll see you later. Bye, everybody.